Those are the middle two letters of the word industry, U.S. And that is our job around the world. Run in, free some people, and whip a little industry on them. Here's your industry. Cool it a while, will you? So they can enjoy the benefits of industry that we have come to enjoy. Oh, beautiful for smoggy skies, insecticided grain, for strip-mined mountains' majesty above the asphalt plain. America, America, man sheds his waste on thee and hides the pines with billboard signs from sea to oily sea.
I'm Dave Saldana with Center for Media and Democracy. For 5 years, TransCanada has been trying to build the Keystone XL pipeline, taking tar sands oil from northern Alberta through the American heartland and down to the Texas Gulf Coast. For 5 years, the American people have been fighting back. TransCanada and its supporters in Congress have made a lot of promises about jobs and tax revenues and energy independence. We decided to take a look at those claims and compare them to the facts. What we learn might surprise you. Join us now as we expose big oil's lies and show how Keystone XL is a raw deal for the American people. As the days count down until President Obama's ultimate decision on whether to approve the Keystone XL pipeline, the fight is heating up. People on the front lines of Keystone know that what's at stake is almost too big to imagine.
The media often reduce the issue to a he said, she said difference of opinion. But deeper analysis of the evidence shows that big oil and its cheerleaders in Congress are not giving the American public a straight story.
It's really unfortunate that TransCanada has lied repeatedly for years. And what's even more dismaying is that when they've put out a number that's patently false, we've seen some of those numbers repeated in newspapers across the country as if they're facts rather than the lies that they are.
The truth has slowly come out about the risks and hazards of the pipeline, seeping out like uncontrolled oil leaks in the Canadian wilderness. The energy and water-intensive process of getting the bitumen out of the ground is just the first ugly step.
It's called the tar sands. It's a thick, sticky substance, a tar-like substance. It's very difficult to get out of the ground. It's literally mined in an open-cast mine with giant shovels and trucks, and then washed out of the soil, out of the sand and clay.
The waste materials from the extraction and separation process, called tailings, is dumped in pits so large they can be seen from space.
I saw firsthand these retaining ponds, and the area that I was standing at, it extended beyond the horizon. It was like I was standing at the edge of the ocean, except this was not an ocean. This was a contaminated body of water.
The level of immediate destruction, from pristine wilderness to industrial wasteland, is unprecedented in human history.
Producing tar sands, the industry is interested in strip mining an area the size of Florida. And unfortunately, this area where they want to strip mine is one of the most ecologically important areas in North America.
I was just up there this summer to look at the tar sands complex, and the technical name, I think, for what is going on up there is Mordor. I mean, it is unbelievable. You just can't imagine how gruesome it is.
On the other end, in Port Arthur, Texas, the devastation has been happening for generations, trapping poor people in a deadly spiral of poverty and disease.
Oftentimes, frontline communities, which tend to be low-income and minority communities, are left out of the conversation, ignored, and they bear the brunt. You know, you hear this term sacrifice zones.
A lot of the kids cannot play outside because of respiratory problems, or they come outside for a little while and then their mothers will notice their eyes starting to swell. You know, a lot of volatile organic compounds are escaping from that flare. These are the kind of things that we have to deal with.
Once the carbon trapped in the tar sands is converted to oil and burned as fuel, the impact on global warming and weather extremes is essentially unfathomable.
We've destabilized the planet's climate system, and the only question is how much farther we're going to go. What we call civilization will just be a big disaster response operation.
Despite the fact the world's climate scientists are virtually unanimous in agreement that the planet is getting hotter and humans are responsible, And as NASA climatologist James Hansen famously said, tar sands exploitation would mean game over for the climate. Some climate deniers claim it's all a hoax, and we should trust big oil.
I think there's been a fair amount of scaremongering that says that the only way we can address climate change is through drastic action that is going to increase everybody's electricity bills.
As global temperatures steadily increase and extreme weather events become more frequent, the fight against big oil's big lies on Keystone XL may literally be the fight of our lives.
The people who live in Keystone's path know what happens when pipelines fail and dump their toxic payload into people's lawns. While big oil rakes off the profits, taxpayers are left with the burden of cleaning up.
The proposed route for the Keystone XL pipeline crosses the U.S.-Canadian border in eastern Montana, then weaves its way to Port Arthur, Texas. It crosses the Ogallala Aquifer, which supplies 30% of the nation's fresh water and irrigates America's most productive farm and ranch land. The State Department's discredited environmental report said the pipeline posed little threat to the aquifer, but ranchers and farmers whose livelihoods depend on it refuse to believe it.
There has not been a worst-case scenario spill analysis on the Ogallala Aquifer, the Platte River, the Niobrara River, the countless family wells. We want to see that proper water analysis done.
It's not out of the question we could see U.S. agriculture destroyed by this tar sands pipeline. The risk is the end of the breadbasket. Can you imagine if that's what happens?
While TransCanada claims that there's little chance of a leak contaminating the aquifer, Big Oil's promises on pipeline safety are contradicted by the evidence in the streets of Mayflower, Arkansas.
The smell is unbelievable. I mean, look. Incredible, and that is oil.
A March 23 pipeline rupture ruined lives and destroyed livelihoods as property values plummeted and businesses closed, while the cleanup efforts ranged from inept to pathetic.
These are their paper towels. This is their solution.
Mayflower can see its future in the communities on the banks of Michigan's Kalamazoo River.
At the time of the spill, my children were at a daycare center. My son had throwing up. My daughter developed a very strange rash on her body. There were headaches, nausea, vomiting.
Our business was closed for 3.5 months. The impact financially to us was incredible. You know, how do we get that business back?
More than 2 years after a tar sands pipeline leaked 1 million gallons of diluted bitumen into the river, the cleanup has topped $1 billion and counting.
The cost of cleaning up each barrel was more than in any other case, even the Deepwater Horizon, although both incidents are not really cleaned up.
Cleaning an oil spill can cost enough to bankrupt even a thriving company. To protect taxpayers from having to pick up the tab, the government requires pipelines to pay into an insurance fund. But luckily for TransCanada, a loophole in that law puts U.S. taxpayers entirely on the hook for the cost of Keystone spills.
Pipelines carrying unconventional oil, and tar sands is categorized as unconventional oil, are exempt from paying in to the oil spill liability trust fund.
And so if we were to have a problem or an accident with a tar sands pipeline, and we've seen dozens in the past couple of years, there's no money there to take care of the problem.
Canada's Prime Minister says tar sands oil is coming to the U.S. either by pipeline or train. U.S. oil transports by train have surged by 4,000% in recent years. But after an oil tanker derailed and exploded in Quebec last year, killing 47 people and demolishing a city, that sounds more like a threat than a promise.
The victims of big oil's accidents rarely come from the higher rungs of the economic ladder. Pipelines don't run through the front yards of mansions. Keystone XL is no exception. From poor First Nations communities in Canada to poor minority neighborhoods in Texas, Chicago, Detroit, low-income people will be bearing the brunt.
First Nations tribes in northern Alberta have relied on the Athabasca River for centuries. Its fish and wildlife sustaining generations of Cree, Chippewan, and other Aboriginal peoples. Today, instead of giving life, the river is bringing death.
Like, I'm a good person. Like, what did I deserve to get cancer at 17 years old? What did I deserve to have some lady tell me, you can't have kids?
There are so many of our people dying of cancers that are so rare, according to our doctor.
High concentrations of mercury, heavy metals, and other toxins are present downriver from the tar sands, while wildlife show dangerous levels of contaminants and fish are plagued with deformities and mutations. At the receiving end of the proposed pipeline, the impoverished community of Port Arthur, Texas, deals with decades' worth of toxins from the refineries that ring the city.
Too many of our residents here suffer from cancer. Too many of our kids are dealing with respiratory problems. 1 out of every 5 households have a child or someone in it that has to use a nebulizer or take breathing treatments before they go to bed at night, and for the kids or before they go to school. And it's not right.
Residents of Port Arthur live with the knowledge that their community is constantly being poisoned. The government allows refineries to dump a certain amount of pollution into the air, but those limits are routinely violated, visible in the black plumes that hang over the neighborhood like a shroud. Those who can afford to move have gone, leaving only those too poor to go anywhere else.
A lot of the families that are here, they can't really afford to move away. Living next to these industries, this is why the rent is so cheap. This is why a lot of people live here, because they can't afford to go anywhere else.
Like Port Arthur, Detroit is a city in crisis, facing municipal bankruptcy and massive unemployment. Oil refineries used its impoverished waterfront to dump their petroleum coke, a dangerous byproduct of tar sands production, too dirty to burn in the U.S., but used as a cheap coal substitute in developing countries. In 2013, a 4-story mountain of it sat uncovered alongside the Detroit River, bordering Ontario, Canada.
Is that the pet coke? No, are you kidding me? What, breathe it?
Our Windsor neighbor, some folks started calling me and they were asking me, what's those black piles? I said, what black piles? And at that time, those piles were about, I would say, 15 feet tall. We confirmed that the petroleum coke was on the sidewalk where the bus stops are, that they were on people's window sills that lived nearby.
State Representative Rashida Tlaib's constituents waged a relentless fight against the pet coke piles until eventually the state ordered them removed. The piles are now appearing on the lake shore near Chicago, where the billionaire Koch brothers are storing it for export to countries too poor to enforce environmental regulations.
This stuff just seemed to begin appearing almost overnight without warning. Suddenly, with the new operations at BP, we're starting to get the tar sands. A lot of concern about it because it seems to be dustier. We're getting more dust issues now, particularly when there's big wind.
For activists in these underserved communities, the victories are rare, but well worth the struggle because so much is at stake.
We are being disproportionately bombarded with these industries in our area, and also we've been disproportionately impacted by the product that they produce. And it's not fair. This is a serious civil rights violation because what they're doing is basically genocide upon a people.
Pipeline supporters dangle the promise of jobs as bait, and it's very alluring in the current economy. But it turns out to be a bait and switch, with nothing left but a huge risk for American taxpayers.
The nation still faces unacceptable levels of unemployment. This project would provide employment.
Literally, with the stroke of a pen, President Obama can create more than 20,000 new jobs in America.
Here's a $7 billion construction project with more than 20,000 direct jobs and 100,000 indirect jobs.
Keystone supporters promise thousands and thousands of jobs. But even as it pushes for Keystone's approval, the State Department analysis concludes those promises are just wishful thinking.
Usually the politicians that are out there saying, you're killing jobs, are the same politicians that are receiving these major oil contributions.
The State Department found that there would be 3,900 construction jobs. On the national level, one of the ways to think about this is it's that the chance of getting a Keystone XL construction job is similar to the chance of being struck by lightning.
Yeah, they keep on talking about this, an oil pipeline coming down from Canada that's estimated to create about 50 permanent jobs. That's not a jobs plan.
With more than 10 million Americans looking for work, just a few dozen jobs isn't much of a reward considering the number of jobs Keystone could destroy. The pipeline runs through the heart of the agricultural industry that employs nearly 3 million people and indirectly creates another 13 million jobs.
What TransCanada then puts through that pipeline is not good for our families, and that is not fair. They are good jobs for 2 years, and then we assume the risk for the rest of our lives, and that is not okay.
Residents near the Kalamazoo River were promised jobs too, but got something other than what they expected.
The only job growth that I have seen for this pipeline are the workers that are here cleaning up the spill.
If a handful of jobs aren't worth the catastrophic risk, what else might provide incentive for such a project?
The local officials and school administrators are grateful for the tax revenue that would not be there but for the Keystone Pipeline.
Certainly billions of dollars in oil should generate millions in taxes for the government that has to oversee the project and ensure its safety. It should, but there's a loophole.
Could put Keystone XL into a master limited partnership, and therefore the company itself would pay no corporate tax, corporations tax. The shareholders would pay very little tax on the dividends they get from the company.
What, if any, drawbacks would they have to doing that? Is there a reason that they wouldn't?
Not that I know of.
Big Oil stands to make tax-free billions from Keystone, but only a handful of Americans will get jobs on the pipeline. And an accounting trick may let corporations dodge paying taxes altogether. With taxpayers bearing all the risk and corporations taking all the reward, how could this raw deal possibly be approved?
Tell Secretary Kerry and President Obama that the Keystone XL pipeline is all risk and no reward.
There's consensus there that no, Keystone is a no-go. It's a bad deal. It's a climate disaster. We cannot afford to build this pipeline.
TransCanada promises that Keystone XL will give American consumers reliable access to cheap oil and keep us out of dangerous foreign entanglements. It sounds like a good deal, except not a word of it is true.
There would be about 1 million barrels a day of oil coming from a friend in Canada.
And the ability to successfully unlock these resources will lead to increased American prosperity and less energy imports from geopolitically unstable regions of the world.
They make the claim over and over, but when you look closer, sending Canadian oil to the Gulf Coast for American buyers makes no sense at all. Canadian oil companies are looking for a route to refineries with access to the global petroleum market.
Keystone Pipeline has nothing to do with providing ample supplies for American consumers. It has everything to do with getting trapped tar sands oil into the global market.
Even if tar sands oil goes into the global market, at least the U.S. will be less reliant on Middle Eastern oil and thus avoid dangerous military misadventures, right? Truth is, burning tar sands oil impacts global climate and could potentially throw the world into chaos.
Climate change is one of the biggest security threats to this country. If we do see countries in low-lying areas go underwater, we're going to see massive upheavals in those regions, and that's a security risk. That's not my opinion, but that is the opinion of the top security officials in this country today.
The U.S. Defense Department is among the leaders in preparing for catastrophic climate change. Officials there are planning for global social unrest triggered by floods, droughts, famine, and refugee crises triggered by rising sea level and weather extremes, and the potential for war as nations vie for dwindling resources.
The Pentagon told Congress in their defense review that it was time to factor severe climate change into strategic military planning. Global climate change is definitely now occurring, and it's creating instability and potential conflict all over the globe. That's strong language coming from the Pentagon.
When you look at the facts of Keystone XL, it's hard to believe that anybody takes it seriously. How could such an obvious boondoggle get serious consideration? As it so often happens in Washington, it comes down to money. Like so many things in Washington, energy policy is heavily influenced by campaign contributions and lobbying.
I mean, they're called big oil for a reason, right? They're one of the most profitable industries in the world, and they are throwing that money into Washington, D.C. They're buying politicians. When we see politicians that vote the oil agenda, we see, 500 times as much contributions coming in from oil companies.
The organization that's been handing out cash on behalf of Keystone XL is the American Petroleum Institute. An industry lobbying group funded by major oil companies, API spends tens of millions of dollars annually on campaign contributions and lobbying.
I concur that there is global warming and there's climate change. The issue, however, I think still is to be debated. Is it man-made?
If you're a believer in the Bible, one would have to say the Great Flood is an example of climate change. And that certainly wasn't because mankind had overdeveloped hydrocarbon energy.
I call them the alarmists, the same ones who said back in 1975 that an ice age was coming, we're all going to die. They contend that the weather is getting warmer and has since the turn of the century.
API has so much money and so much influence on Capitol Hill, some say they wield veto power over energy policy.
You cannot move legislation without their consent. They are a de facto fourth branch of government.
Faced with that kind of powerful opposition, Keystone's opponents have to fight harder and smarter.
While API and the oil industry have more money, we have more people on our side. You know, TransCanada set out to build this pipeline 5 years ago, and they still haven't. And that's saying something about the efforts of activists throughout the country in stopping this pipeline, despite all of the moneyed, invested interests in seeing it happen.
The fight to stop Keystone XL has been a long, hard battle, and it's not over yet. It's been joined by people from across the American spectrum, from ardent environmentalists to rock-ribbed Republicans. They're joined by their understanding that Keystone XL is high profit for big oil and high risk for everyone else.
This land is my land. They're going to destroy the woods and also they could destroy the springs. It's just devastating, but it also is not very good to have that tar sands anywhere in the United States. This is not just about my land, it's about all of our country.
Around the United States, people are stepping up and taking action to stop Keystone XL. From massive demonstrations at the White House, to public hearings in their communities, to direct action against pipeline construction, they've taken their stand.
You have people coming together from across the political spectrum to stand up and say, no, this is not in our national interest. And some people may be more motivated by landowner rights, some people may be more motivated by climate change, but it's clearly an issue that's bringing people together.
But big oil isn't giving the protesters an easy go. TransCanada reportedly advised law enforcement in Nebraska on using counterterrorism laws against Americans exercising their First Amendment rights. In Oklahoma City, demonstrators face terrorism charges because of glitter on a banner they unfurled at the headquarters of fossil fuel giant Devon Energy.
Telling people that anyone else who wants to take a position in opposition to a government program or policy is, on the terrorist side.
It's not merely opposition to Keystone that has big oil worried. It's the idea that people want alternatives to big oil.
When you have entrenched interests that are very politically powerful and economically powerful, they profit from the status quo. They are threatened by what's known as, in the industry, disruptive technologies. Distributed solar, small-scale wind, geothermal, investments in energy efficiency, the electrification of the transportation sector, the expansion of mass transit. These are all disruptive technologies through the eyes of an ExxonMobil.
Anti-Keystone activists are advocating a green economy as a way to create real jobs and build true energy security for the United States.
If you invested $1 in a renewable project, you would create 4 times the amount of jobs than if you invested $1 in a fossil fuel project.
Keystone's opponents support creating good jobs, but they don't see that coming out of TransCanada's raw deal. They refuse to accept big oil's lies, pledging to stand up and fight back.
This is land that's been in families' hands for over 100 years. And we don't take kindly to foreign corporations coming in and telling us that they're going to take it. So when your bulldozers try to cross our line in the state of Nebraska, every single person will be here saying no. Not in our land, not in our water, not in our country.
Thank you.
There's one reason why we're fighting this pipeline, and it's because we don't believe that American farmers and ranchers should have to take on the risks of a foreign tar sands export pipeline.
Let me explain how this process works. I ask the questions and you answer. You get to vote back in Nebraska. That's who your elected representatives are. So don't start filibustering me. Do you agree with Mr. Keith? Yes or no?
When
yes or no?
No, I don't.
Okay,
When
good.
That statement,
Ken
are you going to let me
Calderia,
answer, or are you just going to
Ken
continue to yell at me?
Calderia, what qualifies you? We've got 3 experts. Do you hold a graduate level degree in any relevant field? Do you hold a graduate degree in any relevant field?
I have a
Let her
graduate
answer the
degree in
question.
international training and education.
You ever take a chemistry course?
No, sir, I did
You ever
not.
take a physics course?
Have you ever worked on a farm?
To each member of the panel, do you believe the administration should render a decision, and when do you believe the administration should render a decision?
I believe the decision should have been rendered years ago.
Yes, it is past due.
My answer, yes, and my time frame would be yesterday. So I think that decision has to be made as soon as possible.
Yes, it should be made immediately.
Yes. Ms. Cleet?
I stand with the president, as he said, when all the proper studies are done, including a worst-case scenario spill on our water.
And what would your time frame be? So you do not believe 5 years is too long?
No, if we still don't have the proper water study, then it's not long enough.
Ms. Klebe, you have had a lot of questions asked of you today, and you'd be what I call fairly combative.
Yes, and my mom would call it assertive or independent. But
Your husband's women-owned business. Who is that woman?
if you want to ask my husband about his business, which I'm not sure that you asked any other panelist about their spouse's business.
Well, you can
which
be
I find
sure of that because I
completely
haven't asked any other
sexist, Mr.
panelists
Long.
anything.
I would hope that we treat witnesses who have come here a bit better than that, and nobody deserves to be harangued in the manner that she was.
I am willing to debate anyone, anytime on this pipeline. I don't have to have a chemistry degree to know that this pipeline is all risk and no reward. It's simply that easy.
It's a sucker punch to America's heartland. The deeper we dig into the Keystone XL pipeline, the closer we get to the truth. China's become one of the biggest players in Canadian oil. Chinese government-backed interests have invested $30 billion in Canadian tar sands development, and China just bought one of Canada's largest producers. They're counting on the U.S. to approve TransCanada's pipeline to ship oil through America's heartland and out to foreign countries like theirs. TransCanada's ads say the oil will help make America energy independent. But under oath, TransCanada won't commit to selling us one single barrel. The oil lobbyists and politicians, they take Americans for suckers. Keystone means more profit for investors like China, more power for their economy, and more carbon pollution for the world. Keystone's a sucker's deal for America. Just say no to Keystone.
Politics just got more interesting where President Obama is concerned. It has to do with the Keystone pipeline from Canada to the U.S. Gulf Coast. And just tonight, a long-delayed environmental impact report could remove a major hurdle for its approval. We get our late report tonight from NBC's Andrea Mitchell.
It is a classic battle. The oil industry arguing jobs and energy independence versus environmentalists worried about oil spills, wildlife, and climate change. The pipeline would stretch for 875 miles from Montana on the Canadian border to Steel City, Nebraska, delivering 830,000 barrels a day of thick tar sands crude oil onto the Gulf Coast. President Obama, trailed for months by anti-pipeline protesters, had promised he wouldn't approve it if it would accelerate climate change.
Our national interest will be served only if this project does not significantly exacerbate the problem of carbon pollution.
Today's report says it won't have an effect on the environment either way. Approval or denial of one crude oil project remains unlikely to significantly impact demand for heavy crude oil, the oil that creates the worst pollution. In other words, this oil will be produced whether the pipeline is built or not. Pipeline advocates say President Obama now has no excuse not to go ahead.
We spent over 5 years on the environment. Time and time again, it shows no environmental impact.
What about jobs? The report says the pipeline would produce 3,900 temporary construction jobs for 1 year in Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas, and 50 permanent jobs. And it states that of 14 protected or endangered species like the whooping crane, only one, a beetle, would be adversely affected. Not so, say opponents.
If ever there's a spill, of course, countless animals can be impacted, and the greatest threat to wildlife is climate change.
Environmentalists point to spills like this one, an old pipeline north of Little Rock last March, still not cleaned up.
There's an enormous amount of political pressure within the Beltway to approve this project. And I think around the country, people understand that this is actually a terrible idea.
Environmentalists are also crying foul because they charge that consultants who worked on today's final report had ties to the pipeline company. A State Department Inspector General is investigating alleged conflict of interest. Brian?
Andrea Mitchell in D.C. tonight. Andrea, thanks.
I'm TransCanada CEO Russ Gurley. They said it couldn't be done. Building an oil pipeline that cut right through America's heartland. I guess we proved them wrong. Yippee! And to think that all it took was a little old-fashioned lying, like when we told the American people it would be good for the economy. Well, Keystone is only going to drive the price of oil up! Oh, but wait! This is my favorite part. We said the Keystone Pipeline was going to increase American oil independence. You want to see who it's really going to increase oil independence for? God bless America.